Hi, this is Scott Bradfield. This is episode 6 of Reading Great Books in the Bathtub, and it's part 2 of a discussion of George Simenon. And don't ever buy PC again. I don't know why they're always popping. They never leave you alone. They're always alerting you to something. And I wanted to conclude today my kind of argument for why I like to read Simenon in the bath. And as a writer, as a reader, both of those sides of me get pleasure from reading his books. I think a lot of people don't quite get Simenon. I'm often, as I've said before, trying to explain to people why I like him, especially for my students to learn, because I'm constantly trying to show them these basics that we talked about in the last episode that they don't know how to do, and it's so easy to learn them and see them in Simenon page after page, and they just don't seem to catch it. So I'm making my argument again. Just as a note, I've been reading so many of these books over the years. I picked this off the shelf, and I read that first page for you first 3 paragraphs last week. And as I went on to read the book, I realized I just finished reading this book about 3 months ago. That's how many Maigres there are. They're not formulaic, but that did take a little while. After a couple pages, I realized I have read this book before, and I went through and read it again, and I enjoyed it even more the second time. I thought I would take you through a little bit about how Simenon structures a novel and how he delivers just sort of good narrative scenes. As I was trying to show you with the first few paragraphs last week, most of the things that are happening to the reader, when we're reading a book, we're in scenes, we're hearing people speak, and we're making our own judgments about those people, and we're seeing things through the eyes of Maigret in these books. Maigret is a much more stable character than the characters of most of Simenon's thrillers. In his thrillers, they're all losing control, but Maigret is always watching and gaining control over situations. He's interested in people. He's particularly interested in groups of people and how they react and relate to one another and where their secrets are. And Maigret likes to go in, find out what's happening, solve the problem, have a few nice meals, and then go home to his wife. It's basically the plot of every book. And yet they're not at all the same. Each book starts off with a set of ideas that are narrative. They're not philosophical ideas about the meaning of identity. They are ideas about characters. For example, in the beginning of the book I've read now twice in 3 months, we have 2 or 3 setups. One is that Maigret is in Paris, and he is being followed by an English detective named Mr. Pike from Scotland Yard, and they're doing a foreign exchange system where he's over here watching the French do their job, and he's making Maigret feel a little uncomfortable, and they're a little competitive. And the way an English person would run a case and how a French person or Maigret would run a case are sort of contrasted in the opening chapter. Now, we've set that up at the beginning, and that's going to run through the whole book. So we have our novels being shaped from that first scene. And as readers, we're getting interested in that little relationship. We also learn of a second relationship, which is that a man has died in I can't pronounce this probably correctly, the Porquerolles, which is an island off the south of France, I believe, which is very kind of a beatnik paradise at the time. All the loose people of the world kind of with a little money end up there. And it's kind of a group of oddballs and outcasts. And a man has been murdered there who died shortly after telling everyone he was friends with the famous Maigret. That's set up. Now, we have our whole novel is sort of going to be delivered now within this frame. Okay, it's not going to be constrained at all, because Simenon, as I never tire of telling people, does not know where his book is going when he starts it. He does know he has limitations for his book, and the entire book will take place over the course of this case. So we have this. We have chapter 1. We have all this stuff set up quickly, but it's not plot stuff. It's all character stuff. It's all Maigret's interest in Pike, and his interest in remembering this man who he actually was a criminal who he had to put in jail at one time, and the criminal's girlfriend had been friends with Maigret, and he had tried to help her. And he doesn't remember all of this, but as he goes to the Porquerolles to investigate this crime, he remembers it. He meets the woman who he helped at one point. All of these characters are from a world that Simenon knows. He liked to hang out in kind of crummy cafes. He hung out with a lot of prostitutes, a lot of and the people who lived in the world of these houses of prostitution. And he can write about all these people because he sort of understands them all. So this woman comes into the book, and the course of the novel is no Agatha Christie clevernesses. He doesn't uncover secret clues or the complications of the plot. He discovers who the murderer is almost as the reader discovers it, by watching the people, how they react, and understanding the relationships between them. So you'll often have long scenes in this book. I don't think I enjoyed it the first time as much, where Maigret simply sits in a cafe and watches the different people interact, catches bits of dialogue, sees moments between the different characters. And that's how his method usually operates, is he just observes people and then interacts mildly on occasion. The shape of the book is all about his understanding of these people, and then the small resolution at the end of finding out the sort of people who committed this murder, and his interest in the man who died and this English detective. It's all kind of human drama, and it's all very low-key, and it's absorbing. But you have to pay attention because, as I was trying to show you in those 3 sentences, if you look at those first 3 sentences where we set up a dramatic scene, and then we meet Mr. Pike in the next paragraph, Simenon gets this stuff through in a page where you would see Lee Child or Jonathan Kellerman or Stephen King spend 20 pages explaining all of the same stuff. And we understand the stuff because we're watching a good writer describe it to us. He works hard to pare away the style. He often said he used to cut any poetry from his work. Colette taught him this. Cut any sign of poetry. And the reader just simply does those things that we started to talk about last week, which is we listen and we hear just like Maigret does, and we make our own decisions, and we are free to make our own decisions because the author is not kind of pushing us into corners and tricking us with fake clues here and there. So he writes mysteries, but they're never contrived, plot-oriented mysteries. And he's never dishonest as a writer, rarely dishonest, rarely manipulates you, tricks you. He tries to put you in the case or the shoes of Maigret. A few more things I wanted to say. I haven't read this. I read this about 6 months ago. I mentioned this, The Hand. This is the opposite. These are the thrillers. They're the opposite of the Maigrets. I wanted to read just the opening of this one of my favorite books, also published as The Man on the Bench in the Barn, and show you again how quickly Simenon sets up his situation. And that situation drives the book. It's really what absorbs you as a reader, is you're in the shoes of somebody very quickly in a particular situation. First 2 paragraphs. I was sitting on the bench in the barn. Not only was I aware of being there, in front of the sagging door that, with each swing, let in a gust of wind and snow, but I saw myself as clearly as in a mirror, noting the incongruity of my situation. The bench was a garden bench painted red. We had 3 of them, which we put away for the winter, along with the lawnmower, the garden tools, and the window screens. Now, again, we have 2 paragraphs here. Simenon rarely writes first-person thrillers. We are in the shoes of a man who has who is in the process of committing a crime of omission. I don't know how else to describe it. It's a great idea for a setup. It's a man who has lived this kind of boring life with his wife in the middle of Connecticut, and a friend comes to visit with his wife. And while they're staying with him, they go to a party, and at the party, the narrator of the story sees his friend making love with this kind of very fabulous woman of the house, and he gets very jealous. He's very upset because this man's having fun with this great-looking woman who he always has desired. And when they go home, he's still angry at his old friend. And there's a huge Connecticut snowstorm. They get stuck in the snow. And the narrator that gets out, him and the two wives find their way to the house, and the man gets lost. Their friend gets lost. The narrator is supposed to go out and find the man and bring him back. But instead of going to look for his friend in the snow, he goes into the barn and smokes cigarettes for a couple of hours. And the friend, who he's angry at, dies in the snow. Now, there's a thriller there, you would think. And the thriller that Simenon comes up with is not the thriller. There's not some people shooting each other and super criminals and super evil people running around. And Hannibal Lecter's not eating people. The thriller is that this man has somehow walked outside of his normal life. Typical Simenon situation. He's walked out of his normal life and he started to do things that are dangerous. This sort of frees him in a way. He's trying to avoid the police and from taking responsibility for all of this. But what I find interesting in these books is that for the writer, the plot is already driving itself. Because Simenon knows the man, he knows the place he lives in, and he knows that feeling of trying to get out of this kind of constricting relationship. The rest of the novel is about this man exploring and adventuring even further in his life outside of his marriage to his wife, this kind of dull marriage, and the relationship between him and his wife, who actually sort of knows that he's doing these things. Now, it's a great little psychological novel. It's never explained to us. Simenon never psychologizes his characters. He understands them, and he understands one or two important things about them. And we are hooked, I think. But again, you have to pay attention. Nothing's explained to you. You often just see things in the room, see things in the house, and so forth. I mean, Simenon writes really these kind of existential thrillers that horribly boring writers. And it's worth comparing Simenon to Camus. One of the most boring writers I've ever read. I often have students come to me and I say, who is your favorite writer? They tell me Camus. And I say, I can't, I'm not going to be able to help them. Simenon could tell a story, unlike Camus. The philosophy, this overblown philosophy in Camus, is just kind of the world of Simenon. He's not thinking about it. It's just a world without God, where people have to make their own decisions, and where society's rules don't mean anything. That's just how Simenon sees the world. And he writes a couple hundred books like that. So this type of book, the character sort of, the sense of disorder and disorientation sort of escalates chapter after chapter. And whether the character hangs on or not is always the issue for the reader. Whereas the more comforting books, the ones that are more popular and more often read, are the ones where you know Maigrey's coming along at the end, and he will solve the problem. It won't be a perfect world when Maigrey's finished, but he'll have understood the characters and why they did things. He wants to know why people committed crimes, not who committed them. So anyway, I want to finish that on Simenon. I think you can read him in the bath every day, and you don't need to keep notes about everything you write like you kind of have to do with Pynchon. And I would also like to say that I do feel when I try to decide if this is a great novel or not, I don't know if I can say it is. But I do believe that many of the Simenon books are great novels. And that is because they don't waste a single moment. And every character is contributing to the central story, which when we're finished, we feel like we've seen an entire significant period in a character's life. Even Maigrey, there's something about that crime that really comes through to Maigrey at the end of the story, or his relationships with the other characters. And at the end of the thrillers, we feel like we know that guy somehow, and he becomes an important person in our life. Nothing's wasted, whereas, again, I think you could probably cut a third of this, and you would probably never miss it. Okay? As much as I love Pynchon. Okay, I'm going to end this now. Next week, we're going to try an experiment, and I'm going to try a very ambitious experiment. So we'll talk about it next week, and I'll suggest you get some reading materials and read along. Okay, thanks a lot. Bye.